Hello, and welcome to another episode of Psychology of the Grind. My name is Rob Walker, and I help aspiring leader entrepreneurs develop their mindset and business skills to win in business and in life. And on this podcast, we have powerful conversations with important leaders and share some of their insights, strategies, and mindsets to help us elevate your leadership and build your legacy. And today, we have a very special guest. She is someone who I latched on to at a very early age. When I first entered into high school at age 14, she was there with me the entire 4 years and really saw me grow and played a pivotal role in helping me decide what direction I wanted to go into. Dr. Sparks is someone who has such a full career. She's taught at every level, elementary, middle school, high school, now graduate degree students. She holds her doctorate in educational leadership, a master's of education, a BA in English. She's held roles as a department lead, a department chair, school advisory chair, site-based director of preparing new educator support program, and the list just goes on and on from there. Honestly, I'd be here all day trying to touch on all the accomplishments. So I just want to give a warm welcome to my journalism teacher, Dr. Sparks. Oh my gosh, that was a mouthful. How are you?
I'm good. I hope me popping in didn't mess it up.
Not at all, not at all. Still trying to get it all down packed, so it's work in progress.
Well, I'm going to learn a lesson because I have a written goal in my current position to start a podcast this year and to get at least one episode done by May. So, and I know nothing. I mean, I've been doing research on it, but this will be a good experience. So.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh, it's so good to see your face. You know, it's funny because I wrote down how long it's been. It's been 23 years.
I know. I've been thinking about that too. And I was telling my husband this morning, I said, you know, Rob Walker is from the Louisa days, the early days in journalism.
Yeah.
And I know Louisa and I have stayed in touch the whole time. Like there was never a period of time that we weren't in touch. I mentored her through college. We hired her at Tampa Bay Tech.
Wow.
I turned the program over to her when I went to the district. I said, here you
Really?
go. And she stayed a little while after that. Then she went to Gaither and then Plant. And each time she would contact me and say, this is what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think? And I would be like, you do you.
Yeah.
Go where the work is the best.
Yes.
And now she's in London at the American College in London. Or the American School in London. That's the name of it. Anyway, so I kind of can measure time by her. And
Yes.
I was like, oh man, this has been a good long while.
Well, you know, it's so funny because I was one of those students, like, when I walked out those doors, I never looked back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I started my college journey and I moved to Gainesville and did the whole deal. You know, it was always on my heart to come back and just visit and just kind of check in and see how everyone was doing. But it never really panned out. You know, life just kind of got in the way. I can't tell you that it didn't cross my mind just to come in and just say hi or see how everyone was doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to me, it's amazing because there's so many students that you've had that you'd have to leave some sort of impact in order for them to be memorable, just in case, unless you're just really good at remembering all your students.
I can't say honestly that I remember all of my students, especially the ones before Tampa Bay Tech, because when you
Yes.
teach a student in one class out of a day for 1 year, for many, many years, after a while, that all blurs together, you know? But
For sure.
the students at Tampa Bay Tech, you know, especially those who stayed in the program the whole time like you did.
Yes.
I mean, what did I taught you probably 3 periods in your senior year. And I mean, half the day we were together.
Yeah.
We traveled and, you know,
Yeah.
those things get emblazoned on your memory. And so, yeah, you did leave an impact on me.
I was thinking about what type of student I was back in those days. And I was like, I must have just been a nightmare.
Not at
Not really
all.
a nightmare, but I had so much potential, but was just so girl crazy. And it just, I probably missed out on a lot of opportunities because I couldn't focus.
Well, since my Tampa Bay Tech days when I was working on my doctorate, at that point, I don't know if you're aware, but Hillsborough County, under the leadership of Mary Ellen Elia, who was superintendent, I think, when you were a student or shortly thereafter, I opened two middle schools, an all boys preparatory academy and an all girls preparatory academy. So they're true public schools, but they're magnet so that they're only choice because you can't force a family to do that.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so when I did that, I did a lot of learning and researching, traveled to Colorado for training on gender differentiated instruction and, how the male brain, the female brain work. So then, that was like a real eye opener because I could look over everything up to that time. So it was very, very, very typical for boys, especially in a co-gender environment, to not be focused.
Yes. It's so funny because I was trying to think back to those days and I'm just like, I couldn't remember, and maybe you might, I don't know, but there was an event at Al Lopez Park, and that is where they did the introductions to like different high schools. So there was like Blake, and then there was Tech, and there were all these other different programs. And so if you wanted to get information about what programs they offered, they kind of just had like this event where you could come out and meet people. And I don't know if you were at that event or if I actually didn't meet you until I got to Tech. But if I remember correctly, I don't feel like when I got there, that was my first time meeting you. Could have been. Hard to say.
Did a lot of those marketing events, but the ones I remember were at the state fairgrounds. I don't remember
Okay.
Al Lopez, but I also was pretty much, and you probably remember this too. We always had people coming through the lab who were touring and trying to pick
Mm-hmm.
out a school
Yeah.
and pick out a program. And
Yeah.
so it could have been any number of things because I was pretty much always out there and I am still pretty much always out there.
Well, that's really cool. I say that I latched on to you early on because I remember being a freshman, and for some reason I had, I guess, like a first period class, if I remember correctly, and like Manziel, and I didn't hear you. Yeah, yeah. I was there with Manziel and Dimitri, not Dimitri, Rhonda Brooks and a bunch of seniors. There were a bunch of seniors in this class, and I was the only freshman in there. And that was a really cool thing for me being so young with these older kids, and it just made a really big impact. So that was pretty neat. I had to do a little bit of research just to kind of prepare myself for this interview. I thought that it was really cool that you are now Dr. Sparks, and I wanted to start not necessarily from the beginning, but just to kind of get like an understanding of like with this podcast, my goal is to help the audience understand how leadership in different roles, all different types of roles, can apply, how they can take some of that mindset or some of those skills and apply it to whatever it is that they might be doing. Was there ever like in those early days a point in time where you were just like, I know for a fact I want to be an educator or I want to be a teacher?
That was something that was a very deliberate deliberation. You reach a point in college where you have to declare a major, as you know,
Yes.
and I went in undeclared. Way back then, people would say the phrase was, "What are you here for?" Instead of "What is your major?" They would say, "What are you here for?" And I would always say, "My dad," because my parents were older when they had me, and
Hmm.
they both grew up during the Depression. My father quit school to join the Army during World War II. There's ancient history in my life.
Wow.
And so neither of them went to college. My father never did get his high school diploma. He worked as an engineer at Honeywell without a degree or a diploma. Worked on the Gemini series of space capsules
Wow.
and on the Apollo series. But he and my mother both always said, "You're going to college." And when I was 7, Santa Claus left me a typewriter for Christmas. I took that very same typewriter with me to college.
Did you really?
In the 1970s, we still had typewriters. And I typed all my papers on it. But it was
Wow.
during that time in college that I thought about what I wanted to do. And because unlike my husband and I met in college, so we graduated together. And he never had that feeling that you had to do one thing for your whole life. And he didn't
Yes.
understand why I was agonizing over my choice of major. And I'm like, because I'm going to make a career out of it, and it is what I'm going to do forever. And it has been. And
Yes.
so it was during those conversations with him that I made that decision to become a teacher.
So was there something about you just as an individual, characteristics that you embodied that would make someone say, go see Carla, she's really good at giving advice or giving encouragement or whatever it might be?
That it's funny that you asked me that question because when I was in high school, I was that person. Like everyone called me on my landline telephone to say, hey, what time are we supposed to be there and who's driving and how are you going to pick me up? And it I remember my mother commenting, they always check in with you to see where they're supposed to be and what time. And by the way, are you charging anybody for gas? Because I'm not giving you gas money. So yeah, I was just kind of that person. And I remember that starting when I was in high school, that people just depended on me to keep things organized and moving.
Yes. That's actually really cool because it kind of shapes you as a person because then you start to embody those characteristics even if they're not natural. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah.
So that's what is there like a time that you can remember where during those early years you may have thought about going in a different direction, or has it always been this is the course and I'm just gonna stay going down this road?
It's always been.
It's always been.
The only possible exception is when I had my first child, I took a year off of teaching. That was a very the pocketbook was empty time. And I mean,
Absolutely.
we'd only been married a couple of years and really living on one salary was not optional,
Yes,
but we were
yes.
doing it. And so I started doing some things on the side with home decorating and just stuff like that. And that was fun and I was good at it, but it was never going to derail me. And so after that 1 year, I went right back to the classroom. And then it happened again when my daughter, that same baby, when
Yeah.
she went off to college that summer, this is going to sound a little crazy, but I signed up for Mary Kay to be a consultant.
Yeah, yeah.
And I
I know
went
Mary
through the
Kay.
training and all that was summer, and I had the summer off because I was still teaching at Tampa Bay Tech. You probably knew me at that point in time.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of like my project to help me not miss my daughter so much. And I was
Okay.
doing that on the side, but it turns out that teaching and selling are the same thing. So if you sell when you teach, you sell a lot. So I was winning prizes and they wanted me to quit teaching and do Mary Kay full time. And I was like, I was trying to explain to them what it was like working with you guys at Tampa Bay Tech. I said, I don't think you understand. I'm not just a teacher, like I'm really a teacher. And I didn't
Right.
know how to actually verbalize that. And I just kept saying, but no, I can't quit because I'm really a teacher. And I think what I was trying to convey was teaching is in my soul. This is my calling. It's not a thing that I do. It is who I am.
Yes.
And eventually I gave up that because, I explained, look, I travel with my students for competitions and, I don't have like free time. So no, I mean, there were a couple of times that other people or situations tempted me, but it
Yes.
wasn't a real temptation because I just knew. I knew what I was supposed to be doing. And it's funny because even just as recent as last night, I was talking to a friend. And now that I've been doing this for a lifetime,
Mhm.
at one age group or another, I've had a few people say to me, when are you going to retire? And I'm like, well, actually, I am retired from Hillsborough County Public Schools, but I started this job at NLU the very next day. And so this is my encore career.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't have any plans to retire anytime soon. I haven't been released from my calling. Like, what am I going
Yeah.
to do? Sit around and do jigsaw puzzles, which I love, by the way. But that's a thing you do because you're not ready to go to bed yet. You're trying to empty your mind.
Yes. Yes.
That's not a thing you do all day long. And so I just feel like it's really deep within me.
Hmm.
One other thing I'll say about it, I think why my experience at Tampa Bay Tech was so rich for me is because I firmly believe that there is a difference between teaching and shepherding. There are people who are good teachers, but they don't want to be part of your life. They just want to teach
Yes.
you a subject and do it well. And I have worked with many teachers over the years who are excellent teachers, but they are not shepherds. Then there are shepherds who want to guide you and help you and stay with you and mentor you. And there are people who are both. And I am both. I'm a teacher and a shepherd. So when I was working with students in the Journalism Academy at Tampa Bay Tech, that was the best time of my K-12 career because I stayed with you all 4 years and
Yes.
made sure that when you left, you were ready to go do whatever you wanted to do. And that's what I'm doing now with graduate students and postgraduate students. I'm shepherding them through a years long process to make sure that they reach their professional goals by the time they leave me. And I think that's why I just keep going back every day. And the rewards are so rich and so real and so palpable that
Yeah.
why would I stop doing this?
Yeah. No, this is so good. This is so good. It's funny because you answered a lot of questions that I had written down. I think that there's so much to unpack there. I mean, just the fact that, I love the shepherding. I've never heard it that way. I know that there are people who are leaders, but they don't, they 100%. They do it because they get paid to do it, but it's not truly who they are, like on the inside. I know, like for myself, when I started leading, whether it was trainings or small teams or even the big teams that I had, there were people who um, they were all about driving outcomes, and outcomes are important. You have to have objectives, and you have to hit those, whatever those objectives might be. But then there's the actual side of getting to know the individuals themselves, and that's where I like connecting with people. So for me, it was that one-on-one conversations that we would have, that where I got a chance to get to know them as a person, and they would tell me different things about them, and that would communicate to me how I needed to go forward with them, or to get them to tap into whatever they needed to tap into in order to get the job done. And for me, that was the way that I like to lead. However, when it's all about, metrics and outcomes and things of that nature, sometimes there's not room for a lot of that. I'm curious, how has your leadership style kind of evolved over the years?
I think that the main evolution is my self awareness. I think that when I was a young teacher, I don't I didn't really realize that I was a leader at all. Clearly I was even in high school when everyone was calling me to say where to go and what time to be there. That's a form of leadership, that I actually had the answers they needed. But I remember being pretty intimidated. I think it was hard for people to see that I felt that way as a teenager and as a young teacher. I think gradually and incrementally other leaders who were older than me recognized something in me because they started giving me responsibilities pretty early on in my career.
Who was one of those people, if you don't mind sharing, that maybe kind of poured into you at an early age, that kind of took to you?
Yeah, I think when I taught at King High School before I taught at Tampa Bay Tech,
Okay.
and my department head was Jackie Allen. and she asked me to be a team leader for the 10th grade teachers in English. Okay, that sounds like a little job. I took it really seriously, and it makes me think about, he who does a lot with little will get more.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Another way to say that, I tell my doctoral students when they send me a chapter that's well done, I send it back and say, so the reward for great work is more work. You may now begin the next chapter. So I think that's kind of what happened to me. One thing led to another. And then at Tampa Bay Tech, and this would have been after you graduated, I became the department chair for all the industrial programs. So all the male teachers on the Hill, that was
Yeah.
my department, and I was the only female, and you can imagine how well that went over.
Yeah. That sounds like a nightmare.
It was a really good experience for me, um, and I think it was an interesting experience for them. But we got a lot done. We started making capstone projects a requirement of all of our seniors, and it was related to what they were doing in their shop program. And, that's how that all began. And I bumped into somebody from Tampa Bay Tech not too long ago who came racing up to me at one of those events at the fairground and behind. And I was calling my name. I'm like, who's calling my name at the fairground? So I turned around and it was a TBT teacher who wanted to tell me, you were right all along. He had resisted that whole capstone project thing. And he said, you were right. We're still doing it, and you've been gone a long time. And he sent me an article from the newspaper where his students had been featured for their work on their capstone
Wow.
project because we kept it authentic. We made the work real life, real world,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
So I don't know. I think I strayed from your question there.
No, 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 you're good. No, because that was one of the things that I had read, but I didn't have like context, so you kind of brought more clarity to that. So no, thank you. But just like over the years, and you kind of did answer the question because I was curious to know, like, obviously you have yourself as a leader within the classroom, but then you have yourself as a leader with your peers. And I'm sure they're two totally different approaches. Maybe, maybe not. But I would assume that they would be a little bit different in how that you would approach one or the other. Um, I'm sure that that's probably changed how you might, approach an adult versus how how you might do, with a high school kid.
Leading high school kids is the best training ground you can have for any leadership because high school kids are a little difficult to lead. And, we had a good thing going on, as you recall.
Yes.
And so I think that I learned a lot of strategies, like what would backfire, where students would dig in their heels and just resist what we needed to do. And it was
Yes.
never meant to be about me having my way. It was always meant to be about us working together to reach a goal, to publish a
Yes.
newspaper, to
Yes.
win a competition, to be ready to get in the van on time, to
Yes. Yes.
all
Yes.
those things that we did. And so when I started working with adults, it really wasn't very different. It really wasn't. And my favorite thing as I look back at my district leadership roles in Hillsborough County was when I worked with teachers. When I interacted, when I conducted, what they call in-service trainings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those were really fun times. And this is my mantra. Adult learners are not different than kindergartners. You just have to change the vocabulary. Instead of saying line leader, you use a more professional term. And I always tell my students, they say, I'm sorry I'm asking a question I think you already answered. And I tell them, well, adult learners have to hear everything 3 times to process it. Okay,
Yes. Yes.
how is that different than children? It's not.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
all those leadership skills, if you're truly leading, and I really think
Mm-hmm.
that good teachers are leading. They're leading. They're not just teaching. And that's how they get students to succeed because the students will follow.
Yes.
And so I just translated all of that to a different age range. I'm just constantly looking for what will motivate this group of people. And
Yes.
then I try what makes sense to me or what has worked before. And if it works, I keep doing that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Something else that I did do with students, I don't know if you remember this, was the end of the year survey on
Okay.
what, and I surveyed the students and the parents on what worked, what went well, what, and
Yeah.
I do that with my adult students now, but I do it even more and in shorter spurts. So every single class, there's an exit slip, which is, what was the best part of today for you? What do you wish we had done that we didn't do? Things like
Yes.
that. So I just keep repeating what works and then changing what doesn't work. And I think that keeps people motivated.
I love that. I love that. Not that it's even remotely the same, but when I was writing my book and I was talking about self awareness, I wanted to do 5 tips that if you're trying to increase your self awareness, that might really help you. And that was actually one of those tips. It's just in some sort of survey where you can get honest feedback from the people that you're actually overseeing. And sometimes that information might be hard to hear right off the bat, especially for new leaders. But once you internalize it and you come to peace with it, it's really valuable information, and it'll help you. It'll catapult you light years ahead if you just listen and really follow. I had some instances where I felt like the feedback that I got was a little off base because they weren't the type of individual who was willing to comply and follow the guidelines and so on and so forth. So I felt like it was a little unfair, but I had to go back to myself and say, hey, this was their experience, and you have to respect that. And that was tough.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
is it is tough sometimes, and you're kind of like walking on a balance beam or a tight wire, because you do have to realize that somebody's perspective is their reality, and if
Hmm.
that's their perspective on the experience you've given them, then is there something you can do to make it better? But at the same time, sometimes you do have to let some of those comments go because sometimes they just aren't valid.
Yes,
And it's
I agree.
that requires a lot of discernment, and so I kind of tend to dwell on those kinds of negative comments like, okay, is this legit? Because it's the only one out of the whole group that said that thing, but that's how they felt. Now, why did they feel that way? Were there external circumstances? Was it
Hmm.
really what we were doing? Are they just not prepared for this? Are they not ready for this? Or
Yes.
could I do something better to help that one person? Because basically, I try to make all of my work individual.
Hmm.
You might be in a group, but I'm working with you as an individual here, and
Yes,
I think we could really change education if we did that consistently.
I agree. Because I feel like the experience should be personal. One question that I had here is, um, success isn't always quantifiable, not at least not right away sometimes. Have you ever struggled with ambiguity in a role?
Oh man. Yeah, yeah. So by the time I left Hillsborough County Public Schools in 2018, that's when I officially retired. I had come to realize that if there was a unique program that district leaders wanted to implement that we had no background for, they would call me.
They would call
So,
you.
so my whole world was ambiguous. So yeah, it was like, okay, well, we want to do this. We want to create this other kind of school. So, for example,
Yeah.
when we started with the all boys prep academy and the all girls prep academy, that had not been done. And
Yeah.
it's not done typically in public schools because there are a lot of Title IX implications and people shy away from things like that. So I remember we had a training. We paid somebody to come in and help us understand how to sell the invisible
Yes.
because we were like, how are we going to get people to want to come here? And then, there were other projects in
Yeah.
addition that once that was rolling, I never let go of it. I was with those schools heavily until I retired, but more projects were added to my plate. At first I was like, you do this because this is going to need a lot of attention. I spent a lot of attention and time there, But ambiguity has been ever present and it is still ever present. My boss came to me and said, we'd like you to come up with a new education program that we can offer to expand our portfolio.
It's like, could you give me some more?
And then 2 weeks later, hey, Carla, what education program have you identified? And I'm like, well, I'm thinking about a few. I need to do some more research. I mean,
Yes, yes, yes.
it's always ambiguous, and I think that's probably uh, something that perhaps new leaders don't realize, that leading it's a pilgrimage.
Yes.
The trail isn't really blazed. You might think that there's been a leader before you, but you bring your own ideas, your own skills that are not necessarily even at all the same as the person before you. So
Yes.
you're going to create a new path, and there's not really a map.
I totally 100% agree. It's so funny just because one of the last roles that I held, I used to meet with I guess he'd be like a department head, or somewhere at the higher level, and we would meet once a quarter or so. Anyway, one of the things when we sat down and talked, I was telling him about the ambiguity in the role that I was currently in. So I worked in finance for about 5 years for Vanguard, and I switched from being on the phones and helping people with accounts to leading teams. And during that time, they put me on these special projects. I was always on a special project. And so anyway, long story short, I was just struggling. I was just like, I was enjoying the work, but I'm like, I don't understand what value I bring. And so when we were having a conversation, I just told him, I was like, hey, listen, I'm really struggling with this. And he was just like, Rob, you got to learn how to get good at living in the gray. And that always stuck with me. You got to get good at learning how to live. And I said, I'm going to take that with me.
I work with a lot of leaders. That's what we do. And those who are still living in black and white, they don't have as great an impact on people who are living with the gray.
Yeah.
Because when you're
Yeah.
working with people, it's all gray really. At the end of the day, it's all gray. Because we're just not all there. It's yeah. Yeah.
A question that I always wanted to know was, this is kind of going back a little bit, but do you consider yourself to be an extrovert?
Absolutely.
You do?
So the true definition of an extrovert is a person who is energized by interacting with people.
Okay.
And an introvert doesn't have to be shy. You might have an introvert who talks animated and loud like me, but they're exhausted by interacting with people, and they have to have that go in a quiet dark room and be alone to
Hmm.
recover, basically. Where,
Yes.
after I teach a class, I'm just ramped up. Look out, here I come. you know and I want to debrief. I want to tell my husband, oh, and so they said this, and then this is what happened, and it was the coolest thing because, and I'm just like,
Yes. Yes.
that's how I react to people even when they're not there anymore.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, I'm totally an extrovert, absolutely.
And the reason why I asked you that question is because I always found like your teaching to be different than other instructors, but it was always so cool. To your point, it made you want to come back. And so I was just wondering if that was thought out or if it was actually who you were as an individual. So it's cool to actually know that that's who you are,
Yeah, that's me, for better or worse. I wear some people out, and it's just a bit much. We started teaching on Zoom during the pandemic, and now we can't get our students to come back to class.
I believe it.
We're
I
still
believe it.
we're still teaching on Zoom. We had been playing around with Zoom before the pandemic, so we pivoted really easily.
Yes.
In fact, in some ways, it was better because we stopped doing things bimodally, which I will say as an educator does not work well. So when you have everybody on Zoom or everybody in the room, that's much better than bimodally. And the students all validated that. They were like, "Oh, we can see better, we can hear better. This is so much better." So when my students come on Zoom, I have a playlist that I created of nice, clean, 80s, 70s, 80s music, and
Yeah.
and they come into that music, and I'm shouting over the music at them saying, "Hey, tell me who's singing that, and what's the name of the song? Who I'll give you this piece of candy," and I'm holding it up on Zoom because I'm always giving out candy. So I'm like, here's your candy. I'll eat it for you. You know, and it's just who I really am. But it is also thought out. It's not just because if people are just who they are, but they haven't thought out a meeting
Yes.
or a class, to me, a meeting and a class is not that different. A meeting should be as engaging as a class if you're going to really get stuff done.
Yes.
So if you don't think that out and you just rely on your vivacious personality, that's thin. That's really thin.
Yes.
And people don't appreciate that because it's kind of a waste of time.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I time how long I will do that because I don't want doctoral students to feel like, we paid tuition and this is what we got.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
exactly, I'm always watching the clock on my monitor, and at the exact starting moment, I put a poll up so they can start with, why am I doing that? Well, I'm just trying to transform their brain to wherever it was to where I want it to be. When I
Yes.
taught in
Yes.
person, I did the same thing in a variety of other ways. You didn't even realize I was doing that with you. But that's key is to get people to move their brain from everything else that's on, all those girls that you were thinking about, all that other stuff. Now, you can't always erase the brain, but you
Yes.
can
Yes.
get it to shift, right?
Yes.
To here's what we're about to talk about today. And so I think those things are important. So I think it's a combination of things. And that's not to say that introverts don't make good teachers, because I think they do. Introverts can bring themselves out. They're just exhausted after, where I'm not.
Well, you'll laugh at this. This is something that you probably didn't know about me. When I started in the journalism academy, I started in journalism because I thought that it would make me a better writer because I love to perform music. So I've always been an artist since for as long as I can remember, probably since like 10 or 11 or 12. I started writing lyrics to songs, creating my own music, going into the recording studio even in high school, and then I did it afterwards. So I was thinking that this would just give me that creative space to build on that creativity and so on and so forth. I only bring that up to say that the whole extroverted part of myself was away, but I was trying to use this as a way to grow within, just to gain more experiences and learn how to write poetry and all the other different types of avenues that there are out there, mediums.
And did you get that from TBT?
I think that my memory's a little shaky, but I think so. I think so for here and there. Journalism was unique in that I got the ability to write stories and things of that nature. I don't remember creative writing, if that makes sense. I don't remember doing any creative writing. Maybe. I'm sure we probably did do some creative writing, but
Well, we added that later as we built the academy. Yeah, we added the literary magazine, and we did a lot of poetry and stuff
yeah,
like and that was an optional course. It wasn't required. We even let people from the other shops come in and take it with us. And
really.
yeah, that was the one class that I was not strict about. I told the people in the guidance office, anybody who wants to take this, they can come in. And they're like, "Well, what about these students who don't write well?" I'm like, "We're making a magazine. We're writing poetry, you know?"
Yeah, that makes sense. Here's a question for you. I know I'm bouncing around a little bit. What has been your strategy for continuous improvement? Like, are you a big goal setter, or how do you sort of say, Carla, who's starting off in elementary education, and I'm going to end up, you know, you know, doing doctoral work in the end? Was that sort of strategic, or is it sort of like just how life just kind of led you?
I would say the latter. That was really more how life led me. And
Mm-hmm.
so, a more direct answer to your question is I'm really introspective
Mm-hmm.
and I replay the day in my mind like it's a loop, a tape on a loop. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that dated me, a tape. So I really like to reflect on the conversations I've had, how people looked and how they sounded while we were talking. Whether it doesn't have to be a class or a meeting, it could just be an interaction. And also, I think this is really important. I try hard to be honest with myself. I
Mm-hmm.
try not to say, well, that was awesome. No, no, no. This happened, and here's what I could have done better, or here's what I should have done that I didn't do, or
Mm-hmm.
here's what I'm going to do next time. I'm pretty, and I try to be fair with myself. Like I'll say
Yeah.
sometimes, okay, I could have done this, but I'm not going to blame myself because
Yes.
the reason I didn't was, and this is all self talk. So I have a
Yes.
lot of self talk.
Yes.
And I think that helps to keep me centered, if that makes sense. And
Mm-hmm.
then the other thing I'll say about like how did I get from teaching third grade to teaching doctoral candidates? I try to watch for the open door.
That's so good.
And then this is not original, I'm borrowing this from my pastor. I try to be judicious because just because a door is open doesn't mean it's the right door.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
try to think about, the open doors and I try to follow what makes sense for me. And when I'm going to make a change, I don't make a change easily or without a lot of thought. I basically do three things. I think carefully.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I make lists on pieces of paper, like
The
pro con and that thing that a lot of people do. I don't always do that in writing. I do sometimes, but it's in my head. I try to talk to people who will give me good counsel.
Yes.
People I really trust, and I don't just trust them to keep my secrets, but I trust them to tell me the truth, to give me good advice, to help me think, or to not give advice and just ask me provocative questions.
Yes.
And then I also pray. So
Yes.
that's how I make decisions when I see an open door or a potentially open door that I want to knock open, right? Because there are some doors I just kicked open. I'm like, I want that. And I feel like I have permission, if you will, to go after it. So I'm going to kick that door open.
Yeah, for sure. Because I guess a question of mine might be: was being a principal ever anything that you aspired to?
I absolutely stated verbally to my husband that I would never be a principal.
Really?
Yeah. I had a duty, a teacher duty in student affairs. And I knew that you had to be an assistant principal to be a principal. And I said, I am watching what they do, and that
Yes.
is not what I'm going to do.
Wanted no parts of it.
No, no, absolutely not. So my first graduate degree was in curriculum and instruction, which served me really well because I used that knowledge to build the Academy of Journalism.
Yes.
That guided me on what to do to make it richer each year. And I will tell you, Rob, the real reason, I can't believe I'm going to confess this on a podcast, um, I ran out of good ideas. I was like, okay, I was in that role a very long time.
Yeah.
And I said out loud to my husband, and I thought to myself, we've got a regular newspaper now. We've got a morning
Yeah.
show. We've got students who are winning competitions. We have now a literary magazine. Then we created a news magazine. And we had 5 publications and
Wow.
300 FTE. That was a duplicated head count, but it's still, that's a lot
Yeah.
of FTE. That's a lot of students. And
Yes.
I knew in my heart that it was time to go. I've done everything I can do, and it's time for a new challenge. Because you know what happens if you do the same thing over and over for too long? You either have to make a change or you will burn out. Those are the only two things that can happen. One or the other will inevitably happen. And the last year or two that I was there, I found myself pretending to be excited.
Got it.
And
Yeah.
I remember saying out loud at home, my students are going to catch on if I don't do something else. They're going to see through it because they know me too well.
Yes. Yes.
That's the other thing I think about good leadership is that you have to really be authentic. You can pretend, like if you're having a bad day, you can pretend you're okay. That's fine.
Hmm.
That's what we call the teacher mask, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you can't just be pretending every day that this is all good because then
No,
you're not being fair to the people that you're leading.
absolutely. All of that's so good. And you probably saw me smile because something that you said resonated with me big time. But that's how the role that I was in. About a year ago, I set off on my own endeavors, and I actually left finance about a year ago, and that sort of is what birthed this and what I'm doing now because I feel so much more rejuvenated and inspired. But I feel like, and you might be able to attest to this, some of the work that you do as a leader is sort of thankless, and you just kind of have to just be okay with that. If it's good, they get the praise, and if it's bad, then you get the you get the praise. Well, and at least that's how it felt. So about a year ago, I said, you know what, I'm gonna test the waters and see if I can do this whole entrepreneur thing. And that's sort of what I've been doing for like the last year. But it's all because of what you just said. It's like after 5 years, I was just burned out. Yeah, it just wasn't where I needed to be
Yeah.
anymore.
So you know when you know that it's time
Oh
for
yeah.
a change. You really know.
Oh yeah.
And that's also been a part of my practice. Like I don't tend to make a lot of change. I was at TBT for 20 years. not
Were you
not
really?
precisely, but I was there from 93 to, well, my math is off, but I was there a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just don't make a lot of change. I mean, I was in Hillsborough County for 33 and a half years. That's a
Yeah.
long
That's
time.
impressive.
That's a
That's
long
impressive.
time. But I want to comment on something that you just said, and we were also talking similarly earlier, and I can't leave without sharing this with you. So something that I've recently become a real heightened awareness of is sometimes you don't see the fruit of your labor right away. I think everybody knows that you sow a seed, especially when you're working with people. You sow a
Yes.
seed and you might not see that fruit for a while. What I've come to realize recently is that you might not ever see that fruit.
Mm.
But that doesn't mean there is no fruit. Because there have been some things that I did when I was in Hillsborough that I thought were pretty important, but nothing came of it, right? Nothing came of it. And I was like, oh. Or things diminished after I left and moved on to the next thing. And that's kind of disheartening. But I had a recent experience where some work that I did 10 years ago in a leadership role in Hillsborough County went nowhere. It just went nowhere. And I went back just a few months ago. I went to a school board meeting to support someone. Something was happening in that board meeting. I don't make a habit of going to board meetings since I don't work there anymore because they're nobody's favorite. But I do go occasionally when something special is happening and I want to support, somebody I care about. So
Yeah.
I bumped into somebody in the hallway that I worked for 10 years ago. And she was like, "Oh my God, come here, I want to talk to you." And she started telling me, she said, "Do you remember when you did this work, you did this, all this research and you wrote this whole thing and you presented it to me?" And she said, "Well, I want you to know that it's now in every high school. That program is in every high school. It's in a whole bunch of middle schools and we're getting ready to roll it out at the elementary level and it's all because of you." And I'm like, "Well, don't you think that somebody else would have picked that up if I hadn't have done that foundational piece?" And she's like, "No, no. And I want you to know that in every meeting I call out your name and remind people that you were here 10 years ago and you did that work, that foundational piece." And I was sharing that with a friend, and he said, "I'm going to send you something, and it's called Water the Bamboo."
Mm-hmm.
and it's on YouTube. So I can't name the credit properly, so you'll have to edit this part.
Yes.
So you're familiar with Water the Bamboo? And
Mm-hmm.
after four
It's growing.
years of no fruit, the bamboo shoots up 90 feet in a day.
Yes.
That's what
Yes.
happened. I did that work. I retired feeling like that work was a wasted period of time
Yes.
because nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. Like it didn't even start. I just did all the research and all the phone calls and all the things you do to prepare to roll out a new program.
Yes.
And nothing happened. And nobody told me why. I just retired feeling like, well, that was a waste. And
Yeah.
now it's all over the place. And the person was sharing with me scores are up, rates are up. And it's because of that work, that program. And the person who was talking to me said, it wouldn't have happened had you not done that.
That's amazing.
And I'm like, wow, I'm going to share that with my graduate students because they need to know that, you're not going to see your fruit always. And it feels discouraging. But you should
Yeah.
just do what you feel is right or what you're told to do
Yeah.
because you don't know what's going to happen later. You just don't. You don't always get to enjoy that. And I think it matters to know that.
It does. It does. And I'm glad you shared that with me because I don't know that I would have ever been thinking about that, but it definitely applies to some different areas of my life that I can definitely pinpoint.
I've had thousands of students at this point in my career, literally, not
Yes.
hundreds, but
Yes. Yes.
thousands.
Yes.
And I don't know what has happened with all of those students, of course, and
Yes.
just like us reconnecting now, but I don't know if I helped anyone. I don't know if I hurt their feelings. I hope I didn't. That was never the goal. So you just don't know. But you have to go in faith, just doing the things that you know that you should do the best you can.
Yes.
Some days that has to be enough. And
It
then
has to
there
be
are
enough.
days that people say thank you.
Or you get that thanks and I'm sure it does something for you. It revitalizes you when you do get that thank you. I'm pretty cognizant of the time and I want to be respectful of your time. I did have a couple more questions for you. I hope you don't mind.
Sure. No, I don't.
I wanted to learn more about the journey with, is it NL? Where you currently, I saw on their website that you got your master's degree there. But what was sort of like the thing that said, okay, I want to teach here now too?
That's a really good question. I'm glad you asked that. So I did do my master's degree there back in 2001 through 3. And it was a really great experience because they used a cohort model.
Yes.
And I went every Monday night from like 5 to 9. And I was with the same people through the whole program. And even within that group of 20 some odd people, I was in a small group with 4 people and it didn't shift. We
I
were
love that.
we were a team for all of our projects. And it was basically project-based learning. There weren't tests. There
Yes.
were you were assessed on your knowledge by your performance, whether that be written performance, presentation. The capstone projects that I first started at Tampa Bay Tech were through my research in that program.
Hmm.
And my whole class went and were judges for those capstone presentations. It was really cool. And it was very rewarding. And when I came out of that program, the doctoral program was not at NLU yet.
Okay.
It was in our home campus is in Chicago, where National Louis
Okay.
University is a very big brand, very well known. In
Got it.
Tampa, we have a lot of competition and not the name isn't as well known, but it's getting there. So I said, when you get that doctoral program to Tampa, I will come and do it. Let me know. I'm not going to go do it anywhere else because I realized in my master's program that the philosophy of education at National Louis University matches my philosophy of education, not vice versa. I didn't have
Yes.
to bend to that philosophy. No, it matched me. And
Yes.
I'm like, I want to do that. So when the doctoral program came, it was a good while later. I did go, and it was an even better experience than the first time.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so while I was doing my doctorate, when I got to a certain point, one of my professors hired me as an adjunct to teach the capstone project to master's students and in ed leadership. And that just tickled me because I was teaching again. Because at that moment I was doing all administrative work in Hillsborough County. So
Okay.
now I got to be teaching again. It was so good. It was so cool. And it was another one of those things where follow the path, look at the open doors. So I
Hmm.
got a call letting me know that someone was going to retire and they were going to advertise an open full-time faculty position. And was I interested? And I'm like, well, I don't know if I'm ready to leave Hillsborough. I have to think about that. So I did all the things I talked about earlier.
Yes.
And I decided, ooh, the pro side was very heavy.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And made that choice not only to teach in higher ed full time, but to do it at National Louis University because of that whole the philosophy of education and me
Matches.
are a perfect match. And so that makes me happy.
No, I love that. I love that. But you said something that I wanted to touch on, and that is why did you go for the doctorate that you selected? The leadership.
Yeah, so getting a doctorate had been in the back of my mind. I think it came from the days of getting that typewriter and my dad saying you're
Yes.
going to college. I I just kind of have this compulsion, if you will, to gather all the knowledge and credentials that I can in the place and space that I'm in, right?
Hmm.
When I was a teacher, I became a national board certified teacher because that's the highest credential in the land. And I don't know that that's self serving. I think it's more like, I need that. I want
Yeah.
that, right? So I wanted a doctorate in education because that's my field. And ed leadership in particular, because two things, one pragmatic and one more goal oriented. I was serving in a role of leadership without a degree in leadership. Remember,
Hmm.
my master's was in curriculum and instruction.
Yes.
That served me really well. And a lot of the work that I did as a leader was around curriculum and around instructional methods. So that was good. But I didn't have a degree in ed leadership. And I'm like, I need to catch up to my work. My degree needs to catch up to the work I'm doing.
Yes.
And I see a
Yes.
lot of people who are coming through my doors now who are just like I was. They're doing this work, but they don't have the credential to back it up. Not that they're
Hmm.
not good at it, but I
Yes.
was just reading a doctoral dissertation this morning by one of my students who just graduated, and she was saying how she got promoted right before she graduated into a big job.
Hmm.
And she said she's using a lot of what she learned in the program to help her make decisions as a higher leader than she was before. And so that's the real reason. And the other reason I chose ed leadership was because I wanted to do it at National Louis University, and
Yes.
that was the doctoral program being offered in Florida, and it just so happened to be the one I needed. So it was
The one
like
that you needed.
it all
Yeah.
lined up, right? So
Yeah.
that's how that came to pass.
No, I love that. I love that. I know even for myself, this podcast is called Psychology of the Grind, and psychology is something that I've grown pretty passionate about. And so, as a result, I have my associate degree in psychology, but it's also something that I study. So I like how teams are formed. I like the whole mindset behind what makes a great team, what makes a great leader, all those different things. And this sort of gives me the platform to be able to have those conversations and even be able to kind of speak to them more in depth and learn from other people. And so, this is just sort of a spin-off of just things that I love, you know what I mean? And so I think that definitely at some point I will continue that path and probably continue on just to kind of expand on that into organizational leadership. But we'll have to see what the future holds here in the next month or two. I guess I wanted to end on this. I wanted to do sort of some word association. You tell me what you think when you hear a specific
Oh boy.
word or
Okay,
term.
word games.
Okay, let's see. What comes to your mind when you hear the word influence?
Do you want me to say one word or just talk
No,
about it?
just whatever comes to mind. Kind of how you see it or what it means to you.
So I think we go back to that word shepherding. When you're shepherding people, you're influencing their life. You're guiding them over a period of time. And that's very, very different than short spurts of instructional material and readings and that kind of thing. When you're influencing people, you're talking with them, like we're talking today, about their life, about what they want, what their goals are, how to get there, how they feel about things. That's influence.
Well, I like that. I like that. What comes to mind when you hear the word vision?
I think about all those vision statements that hang in classrooms and schools that nobody can memorize because they don't hold enough meaning. And so I'm going to answer you in an odd way. This is the only vision statement I've ever been able to memorize, and it's from the Boys Preparatory Academy in Hillsborough County. Molding young men of distinction who will achieve greatness. Molding young men of distinction who will achieve greatness.
Will achieve greatness.
Every boy in the school knows that vision statement by the end of day one. The custodial staff knows the vision of the school. The
Yes.
parents know the vision of the school.
Yes.
So vision is when all the stakeholders understand what we're trying to do. And so when something goes wrong, we can come back to the vision and talk about that and look forward rather than blame gaming and all that stuff, right? So vision is so critically important. And that particular vision statement says nothing about the school. It says everything about the student, which then tells you about the school, right? So it has
Yes.
the right focus. Vision has to be laser focused. It has to be imaginable, memorable, repeatable by anybody to anybody else at any time in any place.
I love it.
I have to give credit. Some of that I got from some authors that I've read.
But you know what, though? It's yours now. It's yours now. What comes to mind when you think of strategic thinking?
Strategic thinking is very focused, very critical. It makes me think about planning, goal setting. Strategic thinking brings reality to goals. So we set goals. We want to raise
Yes.
the graduation rate from 82 to 95 in 4 years, whatever, right? So SMART goals, they're measurable and timely and all that.
Absolutely.
But strategic thinking is how do you make that happen? What are the steps that you're going to take? Who are the people who are going to be responsible for each step? So strategic thinking is not something that happens in 30 minutes with a notepad. Strategic thinking, it's kind of like I was talking about how I'm like go around with a list in my head. You know, I do a lot of my writing in my head when I'm walking through the store, driving down the road. And I think that strategic thinking has to be done by more than one person. I think that there has to be some collaboration so that strategic thinking can be effective.
I agree. I agree. It's funny. 'Cause I early on, maybe not so much as much as I used to, but I used to listen to and read a lot of John Maxwell, who's a big leadership guru. And when I would listen to him, he always talked about all these different types of thinking. You have critical thinking, and you have, it's like all these different ways of thinking. And he wrote several books, Thinking for a Change, and it's just, it's thinking is one of those things that not a lot of people do. You know what I mean? Or give it the time that it takes. Because thinking, it takes time. Like when you're really thinking about something, to give it the energy that it needs. And so something that he said that I try to implement is at least twice a month, have just one day of just nothing but thinking. And it could be different days for different things, but just focus on thinking about that one specific thing. And I've really tried to incorporate that into my life. I'm sure I could probably be better at it, but we all could be better at a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. The fact that you're even thinking about it is remarkable. I like that. That's very
Yeah.
cool.
Um, two more for you. The last one, I feel like you'll definitely hit out the park. But um, this one that's coming up is empathy. What comes to mind when you hear the word empathy?
My granddaughter Vera, she's an empath. She's 12 years old, and she's been an empath um, at least since she was 6 or 7. And when I when I see her, she embodies empathy, right? It's not just a word, it's not just a thing. She embodies that. It's who she is. So last night I was having a phone conversation with a friend that I trust, and it was about something that I'm worried about. And Vera just kept coming in the room and would stand next to me close enough
Mm-hmm.
so that our arms touched. And then she knew that I was really concentrating on my conversation, so she didn't try to interrupt. And when she would leave, she would do this to me to make sure that I know that she's there and that she loves me, even though I might or might not be upset. She was trying to figure out if I was. She felt it.
Yes.
Then she
Yes.
came back about 5, 10 minutes later. She did the same thing, right? So
Yeah.
she makes me understand empathy on a different level than I ever did before. I used to try to stop and think, okay, sympathy means you feel sorry for somebody. Empathy means you know how they feel. Okay, that might be a definition, but that's not how Vera displays empathy.
Yes.
She is feeling your pain and being with you.
Yes.
She doesn't necessarily even talk about it. She's just there, you know? I've known only a couple of people in my life who understand how important it is to sit with people who are struggling and say nothing at all.
Mm-hmm.
Just sit there. You don't have to try to distract them. You don't have to try to make them feel better. You just have to let them know that you're with them.
Yes. There's a lot to learn there. I like that. I like that. Wow. And I guess we'll go out on a high note. Uh, the last word is service.
Service is everything. Service is me. So if Vera is empathy, Carla is service.
Yes.
Everything I do, every decision I make is basically about somebody else. That doesn't mean I don't ever do anything for myself or practice self-care, which is a real big word these days.
Yes.
I do things that I enjoy, but that's not what I live for. I don't live for pleasing me. I live to do what other people need me to do. Every decision, and I think that people who are called to serve understand that. If you're called to serve, you're probably doing more than a job. You're probably serving everyone you know, because
Absolutely.
you know what I mean. So
I
I
do.
find myself, it's funny that you asked me that here because I was just thinking about it the other night. I was asking my husband some mundane thing, but I wanted to know, well, what do you want? And then I looked at my son and I'm like, well, is that what you want? Like, what does everybody want here? And then they're like, well, what do you want, mom? Like, okay, I don't care.
Yeah.
Sometimes I
Yeah.
do. Sometimes I do. But I really think that the rewards in life of a person who is a servant, and that's not necessarily everybody's calling. So if you're not a servant, that's okay. That I mean, you can be something else. But if you are a servant, then the rewards in life all come from service.
Absolutely.